Sup, nerd? I can't really put my finger on why, but I've been thinking about Pokemon a lot lately. It was a huge part of my childhood. The first game I ever owned was Pokemon Silver, and I kept up with the series well up until Pokemon Black and White 2. After that, I kinda drifted away. X and Y came out in my second year of university, and because of the switch to 3D, a lot of my classmates were all over the games, but I generally felt unwowed by them. To everyone else around me, it seemed like the switch to 3D was what they needed for Pokemon to feel new and fresh again. Finally a new take on the games, something cool and different. But to me, I think I just knew how much character had to be removed to make space for that extra dimension. It felt to me like the games had been improving steadily all the way up until Black and White 2, where the series peaked. Of course, that opinion isn't objective. There are lots of reasons to like the new games, and I'd love to hear what your favorites are, but my point is, the series stagnated for me around X and Y. I didn't get back into it until the release of Sword and Shield, and even those games didn't strike me as particularly unique, or new, or different. It was just that I never found myself playing games handheld anymore. If I'm on my Switch, it's almost always plugged into the TV. I knew what to expect with these games, of course, but even with my expectations set at a reasonable level, I couldn't help but think about all the side games Pokemon had released up until now. Pokemon Colosseum, Gale of Darkness, Pokemon Snap, even handheld games like Ranger, Rumble, Pinball, Mystery Dungeon. Pokemon had branched out so much with those games, and so many others, and they were all great. I mean, even thinking back, my favorite Pokemon games had never really been mainline. Snap and Ranger have always had a special place in my heart. I think the only real issue with those is that they're all missing that je ne sais quoi that gives the mainline games their general appeal. The feeling of existing in a larger world and the ability to collect just so many new Pokemon. There are a lot of things that go into the mainline games that set them apart from the others. There's just a potential there that right now can't really be explored because of how releases are structured with games, anime, merch, trading cards, the whole lot. Now, coincidentally, the move to a stronger console that was capable of home console gameplay was, I think, what Pokemon needed to find the courage to experiment more with the gameplay in the mainline games. Sword and Shield brought the Wild area, which introduced an open-world element to the franchise. Legends Arceus followed it up with new iterations on how to battle and catch Pokemon, expanding the open-world areas with very few loading points and building a whole game around the idea. Then, Scarlet and Violet transitioned to a completely seamless open-world system, leaning into the Breath of the Wild style gameplay that emerges from that sort of design. And I know, I'm sensing a but, Cosmo, you're saying, but they haven't really been pulling it off. Each of those ideas and iterations introduces their own unique challenges from both a design and a technological perspective. It takes real talent and ingenuity to be able to pull any of this off. So even though the AAA space is filled with games like this, a team like Game Freak runs a very real risk of missing the mark. Not because they're necessarily incompetent or lazy or whatever word capital G gamers online might have you believe, but because a list of really complex issues like team size or talent availability, access to training, I could go on. People love to talk about how Game Freak imposes these challenges on themselves and set their own schedule and have the resources to grow their studio if they want. That's a whole subject for a whole other video. The fact of the matter is, the games do not perform the way they should. The design ideas are there, but they don't tie into themselves in quite the way they should. And to put it lightly, they don't run very well. Honestly, it's all a bit what game is really fun when you don't have a jerk in your ear telling you it sucks, but if you can't deliver on those promises, you're better off not putting out anything at all. At this point, Pokemon has a reputation for missing the mark from a technological standpoint, and if the franchise wants to kick that reputation, they're going to have to get creative, experiment a bit, maybe take a page out of their own book and evolve the franchise. It's time for change. Obviously, they've been trying, expanding the scope with AAA open-world concepts, but there's so much more to it than that. At its core, Pokemon is still that small, turn-based RPG it's been since the beginning. Even with each game's new battle gimmick, the gameplay loop stays the same. Sure, special temporary Pokemon forms are cool, but they don't actually change how the game is played, at least not at the casual level. I'm not a very competitive player, but I've been told it gets more interesting as you move up that chain. The issue I take with that is that the majority of Pokemon players are children and casual gamers. Most people don't engage with the games that deeply. If they want to generate interest in that gameplay, something's got to budge. Make it more enticing for new players to explore the complexity of that system, or revamp it from the ground up the way other franchises like Final Fantasy have done before. When I boot up Pokemon, I don't feel encouraged to engage with those systems, and to be honest, if they were revamped, I'm not convinced I would want to anyway. Mostly because my favorite thing about Pokemon is the funny little guys. Pokemon's tagline has always been, "Gotta catch 'em all." And coincidentally, you know what I want to do in a Pokemon game? Yeah, that's right. The issue with that is although the game does allow you to catch all the Pokemon and encourages you to do so in small ways, there's no actual advantage for doing so in order to progress the game. In fact, going out of your way to catch all the Pokemon can sometimes feel like a detour, a distraction from the story or the real goal. That is, with one exception. Pokemon Legends Arceus, a pseudo-remake that revisits the Sinnoh region of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl with a unique spin. It takes place in the ancient past, before Pokemon gyms existed, and Pokeballs were still made of wood. This was the one time in the franchise's history where they really truly branched out in terms of gameplay. Battles were reworked. You could now sneak up on a Pokemon in the open world and catch them without ever battling them. And to advance the game, you had to interact with Pokemon in different ways, catching, battling, evolving them, and getting them to use specific moves to fill in their Pokedex entries. It finally felt like Pokemon understood its catch-em-all mantra. Battling was still a big part of the experience, but now it felt a little more balanced with the Pokemon research aspect. And then they threw all of that out for the next game. I'll never understand why. Legends Arceus was a tiny step in the right direction for the franchise, and I think if they followed the line they drew with that game, they would find something really great at the end of it. Now, it is kinda difficult to talk about Pokemon and how it has to change gameplay styles without mentioning a certain other game that came out recently. A game that at the time of writing this video has nearly outsold the most recent Pokemon games. Pal World is a game that takes the cute little guys from Pokemon and combines them with a survival crafting experience. Now, catching monsters has way more benefit outside of battle. You can put them to work at your base to automate production of a bunch of resources. It's a small change, but it's enough of an experiment with the gameplay loop to really prove that there is a ton of unexplored potential in the creature collector genre. It's clear to me that Pokemon doesn't want to branch out when it comes to the mainline games. Sure, they'll dip their toes in the water every once in a while, but never for very long. I think it's high time they did. There's so much potential in the creature collector genre going unexplored right now, and who better to prove that it's possible than the franchise that started it all? There are a load of incredibly dedicated indie developers out there trying their hardest to spin the genre into new territory, but even they don't tend to stray too far from the path in terms of gameplay. They'll iterate on the battle mechanics slightly or introduce new features every now and then, but at their core, they're still turn-based RPGs. There's never a big enough focus on collecting all the little guys for my taste. I'd love to see new entries in the genre that focus on the collectathon aspect of the games, or even just what you could do with all the monsters you've collected. Get them to run your farm, or automate a factory. Command massive armies of Pokemon in a real-time strategy game a la StarCraft. Maybe there's potential in there for a Metroidvania that sees you collecting different monsters so you can use their powers to unblock your path, exploring further and defeating tougher bosses. There's so much potential in the creature collector genre that it starts to become hard to talk about even. And that's without even mentioning the narrative of the Pokemon games. If you ask almost any fan of Pokemon what they think about the story, you'll probably get a mishmash of generally the same opinions. They're too handholdy. They're a bit simple. They're not super mature. And yeah, I agree with that. The stories in Pokemon should be more mature. But Cosmo, Pokemon is for kids. You can't expect a grown-up story, I hear you say. But yes, I can absolutely expect that. I've spent a lot of time looking after and teaching kids. A good 5 or 6 years of my professional life has been spent working for the Boys and Girls Club and teaching various computer technology, programming, and game development summer camps. If there's one thing I can tell you about kids, it's that they don't like it when you talk down to them. They don't need their hands held. They want more than anything to be treated like adults. A mature story isn't one that focuses on sex and violence or whatever. It's just a story that covers more serious topics. Things like mortality, relationships, identity, social and political causes. A mature story doesn't just present material that's only suitable for adults. It's a story about themes that resonate, that reach out to that part of you that makes you human. It trusts the player to really think about and understand the narrative beyond its face value. And most of all, it doesn't talk down to the player. It doesn't treat them like children, even when they are. That's why heroes like Spider-Man work so well for both children and adults. They talk up to their audience. They ask the audience questions about themselves, about their morality and their identity. They place a character in a situation where they have to make tough choices, where they have to decide in the moment what it is they believe in. There are other creature collector games out there that do mature narratives well. My friend Matt Horton even did an entire video about cassette beasts with an eerily similar title to the video you're watching right now, and he explores the topic way more thoroughly than I do. I highly recommend checking it out if you want to hear more about how Pokémon can evolve its narrative. But at the end of the day, the one thing that holds true is that the Pokémon audience has grown up since the first game came out in 1996. Times have changed. Other franchises have kept up to date, challenging their audiences, including the young portion of them, and keeping their game design up to date. I have a deep love for Pokémon that I'll never let go, and I would love more than anything to see them explore the endless potential that the franchise and the genre it exists in holds. Failing that, I know there will always be some passionate developer out there that feels the same way I do, ready to leap at the opportunity to prove what can be done. Thanks.